When we think about what value is from end to end in terms of that experience, it really changes the way that we design, how we build it, how we orchestrate it, and how we continually serve that as well. Who is using it? How does it make their lives better? How does it improve their interactions with our organization? That's really where we get differences in services. And that's where services go from something we provide to something that can actually change people's lives.
With the exponential pace of technology advancement, digital and technology-first services are quickly becoming the primary engagement channel between your organization and your customers. This means that exceptional service is a key differentiator, requiring technology leaders to completely overhaul traditional approach to service delivery. Customers must be at the center of design, orchestration, and delivery, and both the right architecture and operational excellence are more important than ever. Joining me today to discuss how we can elevate our service strategy is AVP of Research, Carleen McCubbin. Carleen, thanks for joining me. And maybe right off the bat, can you tell me a little bit about this exponential technology and exponential IT that we're seeing today?
Exponential IT is Infotech's answer to the pace of change that's happening in technology right now. We see that because of emerging technologies, AI has driven a lot of this. We are seeing a rapid, almost a hockey stick curve in terms of the adoption of this technology. But with that comes both opportunities and new risks. And so as we think about how that changes the role of the CIO and the capabilities that you deliver, it really requires us to think layer by layer through our organizations to say, how do we do this better? And that's what exponential IT is for us.
What's the implication of that on something like service delivery and our service delivery capabilities?
Yeah, so service management and service delivery is something that has been evolving on an ongoing basis. But I think people's headspace around what a service is still caught back in the 90s, particularly what an IT service is. Like Jeff, if I ask you, what's an IT service? What would you say?
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Carleen. I would say an IT service is a business, internal or external facing, bundle of value that gets people some component of what they need to do their jobs.
That's a pretty good answer. Most people, when I say what's an IT service, they say it's the service desk. And it's not. It's not about how we solve problems and issues that come through. It's how we deliver value, as you've described. And I think there's this big difference between how people view an IT service and a service that they get from a company that they like, right? When I think about services that I get from even the bank, or when I get services from the government, I've somehow extrapolated the IT from that experience, but most of those are digital, right? And so when it comes to exponential IT and service management, what we really have to make the shift of is stop thinking about services as the internal services and really shifting to what are the digital services we're providing to our end customer, to our consumer, to our citizens as the primary way that they interact with our organization. And to cross that chasm, it takes multiple different steps that you need to go through in order to be seen in that leadership role, but to prepare the technology. And that's really what we're looking at in this blueprint and in this research is how to do that.
Taking a step back there, if I'm in IT, if I'm in an enterprise technology role, why do I need to care about this, right? Why can't someone else do it? Like, why do we need to take a service mindset at all? Like, what's the value? What's the risk of getting left behind here?
I would say that mindset is what's held people back, right? Because other people, as a result, are doing it. You've got third-party providers who are managing your website, managing your e-commerce. You've got your marketing team or other parts of your organization who are building services in silos. Repeatedly, we see organizations who they'll build a service for their customer just for their own line of business. And we're not thinking across the whole spectrum of what that service really means. And so, one, you're missing out on growth opportunities because when we look at services, we need to be designing end to end, not just this one interaction point. What's the full life cycle of that customer's journey, right? How do they interact with us? Where do they interact with us? What multiple services do they want? And how do we make that whole thing seamless? And so there's a huge growth and value opportunity from this customer or citizen side that we need to think about. And from an IT leader, you're in a perfect position to do that because you're the conduit between all these
Right.
different areas, right? And so it's not just about the experience and making sure it looks pretty and it's functional, but it trickles all the way through to all of your later layers of technology, the platforms that you're using, the security that's going across that. Identity is a core component of this as well, right? All the way through to how you service it. And so IT is in a perfect position to be able to pull that holistic view together in order to be able to deliver exceptional services. And AI is allowing us to do that much faster, right? Because we can really dynamically change what those services are. And so again, these two compounding factors of what's going on with AI, what's going on with the world, and what's going on with our customers are really making this perfect storm for CIOs.
We have an opportunity to step into that role of kind of leader and orchestrator. And if we don't, we're hurting the organization by not doing that. We're hurting the customers, but we're also hurting ourselves as IT, right? We're missing that opportunity, and we can kind of get left behind in the mix. Is that fair?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it comes down to what do you want to be? Where do you want to go? What's the role that you want to have in the organization? Because it's available at this point in time. And we've seen in the past where organizations will put in a CDO or a chief digital officer outside of IT. The exact same thing is going to happen here. We see the rise of the chief digital service officer happening across organizations, and they're taking that function. But that really needs to be an IT function because it pulls everything together in a way that makes sense.
Let's talk through some of the key insights that have come out of the research and the methodology here. You mentioned something earlier, which is that when we're thinking about services, historically and kind of the 90s view of services, it's very much kind of, internal business services, but you don't see it that way. You almost gravitate toward customer services. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I will say, it's not that the IT services are going away or that, I hate the service desk or anything like that. It's a really important part, but it's not the only part. And so when we think about this transition, it really is a shift from an internal customer focus to an external customer focus. And that means you need to be closer to your end customer, knowing what they want, how they interact with the organization. And there's trust building steps that you have to take in order to get there, because your business units may not want you to take that role, right? And so you have to work on that. Typically, we would start by focusing on really streamlining your internal IT services. You'll focus on your critical business services as well. And as you continue to build that trust, or as you have champions in the organization, moving through to that enterprise customer. And that's where the true value point hits.
I want to double down a little bit on that trust building piece. What does that look like? How do you do that? And what are some of the kind of initial challenges to get, started off on that road?
It's a great question. And I think it starts with some introspection of how is IT known in the organization today? A lot of people I talk to, and they're like, IT is known as the organization of no. That's not going to get you there, right?
Yeah.
If you have that reputation in your organization, you're not going to earn that spot as that trusted advisor or as that individual who's going to be direct to customer, right? And so it starts by figuring out where your wins are, stabilizing your organization, making sure that your core services are functioning really well, starting with critical business services. But I also think, find where you have some early wins and early opportunities, either by leveraging AI or through huge customer bases or big projects that are coming through, and identify the value points that you can add there, right? By doing that, it'll start you on your journey to building that trust, get you some early wins, some case studies, put some posters around the office if you're in the office on how that worked, and really start to change the reputation of IT and take on those more strategic areas.
We talked a little bit earlier about this, we used the word orchestrator or orchestration. What does that mean to you, and what does that look like, as we step into the role of, kind of service facilitator or service leader?
Yeah, and this is, thank you for that question, because I think service orchestration is something people don't really think about, but it's the glue that holds everything together. And it's an excellent role for IT to play, because you may have multiple services that you're offering, products and services. You may have things that are delivered through third-party providers, through MSPs, delivered internally. What's the glue that pulls them all together into an overall experience, right? And the role of the service orchestrator really makes sure that you have a clear vision of where you're going as an organization, what the services need to look like, what value looks like from that service, and holds all those people accountable for it to make sure it's working and operating really well. Otherwise, you have multiple different services doing whatever they
Right.
want, right? And that's the problem with a lot of the ways that people deliver. So IT transition to that service orchestrator, managing those multiple players, ensuring that they're delivering as expected, that you have contracts that are related to that is really important.
One of the insights we've got here is, we recommend taking what we call an outside-in approach. What does that mean?
Yeah, so an outside-in approach, we really want to start, again, by not thinking about what we have today, which may sound so bizarre because obviously we're building in the confines of what we have. But when you start from the outside, looking at from customer's perspective, what is it that I want to experience? What are all of the different touch points and milestones that I have or where I'm interacting with your organization? And really start to think about what would a great experience be? I like to do this completely abstracted from my own organization. So I'm like, if I was going to the fair, what would that look like for me? Or do I want to go to Disney or do I want to go to the county fair? What's the difference between that service experience and what my expectations are, right? And then how do I define what the best possible experience would be, what all the touch points are? And then it gives you that creativity to think a little bit differently about your internal services as well.
Got it. So it's all about putting yourself in the shoes of your customer, in the shoes of someone that's interacting with your organization.
Yeah, which isn't new from a customer experience or customer engagement perspective, but a lot of times we've thought of our customer as, just other people in the organization. So that's really the shift, is taking that a step further, practicing things you probably have been doing internally, but
Right.
taking it to that next level.
For most, IT shops, this is probably, a couple of steps outside of their comfort zone. When people are putting this into practice, is it something, again, we use the word orchestrator, is it something that they're kind of taking the lead on and doing in, a silo, or are we seeing them partnering with other, parts of the organization to, get to know their customers better? What does that typically look like?
So I think it's both, right? We see different forms of this in terms of how ready people are to really go on that journey. Right? But people who are ready and are really interested in this, or their industry is forcing them to go in that direction, typically early partnerships that we see tend to connect to either your marketing groups, because they tend to have a lot more digital experiences that are associated. So true partnership around those core elements. We see people looking at, if you have a product division within your organization or critical business services that are offered to the end customer, figuring out who those groups are first, figuring out what their most important services are. For us, we actually pull back to what your business architecture is. What are the business capabilities? What are the most important ones? Mapping all the way through to see how they're all connected as well, and then starting to focus on those value chains and deliveries. Right? So find good internal partners is step one. Find the most critical projects or the things that you're working on, and then focus on that horizontal view of your business capabilities. And that's really how we start that process.
What industries are we seeing, the kind of the strongest use cases for this sort of approach?
Interestingly, government. So higher ed, government are both really active in services, because when you think about service delivery, typically those services are designed for the citizens, right? And we have, it is increasingly the key way that people are going to engage with your organization, with the government, with whatever it is, through getting new services or through asking questions and things like that. And so they're really positioned well from a service management perspective. That's probably the biggest area that we're seeing this shift. We also obviously, financial services has been a leader in these different areas for years too.
Carlene, one of our insights in this space is that, when we focus on designing, orchestrating services, we really have to be focused on value delivery and how we actually get that value out of the service. What does that mean to you, and what are the implications as we go through this process?
It's a great question, because value in a way feels like a buzzword, but it's really the core of everything that you do, right? And so a lot of times we will define what the project outcomes are, or what the budget for things are, but we don't really spend the time to define how will this change our organization? What's the guiding star for how we want to focus? And so when we think about what value is from end to end in terms of that experience, it really changes the way that we design. And so you think about value layer by layer in terms of what that experience needs to look like, how we build it, how we orchestrate it, and how we continually serve that as well. And so when we're doing that and focusing on not what's valuable to me as the person building it, but to the end customer who is using it. How does it make their lives better? How does it improve their interactions with our organization? That's really where we get differences in services. And that's where services go from something we provide to something that can actually change people's lives. And I think it's really powerful.
We've been talking a little bit about, the kind of untapped potential of exponential IT and what that means for service capabilities, for service delivery.
But isn't it exciting?
Yeah, it's super exciting. As we walk through though, most organizations are probably not in a point where they're ready to get to that transformational change right now, right? We see all different levels of maturity. So tell me a little bit more about kind of that maturity curve, that maturity ladder. What does that look like, and what's the journey to get from, either complete absence or complete disarray to, transformational?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we don't believe people are going to make this shift overnight. Maybe that's that practical, tactical side of Infotech coming through. But what we have tried to do is figure out what the core milestones along that journey are. And so rather than focusing all at once on AI, we started by looking at 9 different service capabilities and looking at how did those need to evolve in order to get to that value point. Right? And so that transition really looks like going from something that's maybe more ad hoc, maybe some of those processes don't exist in your organization, maybe they're just done differently in different parts of the organization, whatever that may look like, not measured or whatever that may be, through to something that is really transformative. And when I say transformative, we see a shift in terms of the increase in use of the use of technology and use of AI services, which are becoming more and more available in the service side of the house, as well as that shift from customer focus. And so that curve really reflects the core steps you need to take. And I like to think of it more as the core opportunities to increase in that area. And that's going to look at the data you have, it's going to look at the processes, it's going to look at the skills, and obviously the technology.
Right.
In terms of how you get there.
Joining us here today on our panel, Valence Howden, a Principal Research Director, Carleen McCubbin, AVP of Research, and Andy Neal, our lead of our Technical Counselor Services here at Infotech. Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining. Right off the bat, as we talk about service management and service delivery, AI is playing a bigger and bigger role with many use cases coming to mind, and certainly top of mind for people. What do you see as some of the better short-term wins in terms of AI use cases versus long-term wins? And Andy, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. I can tell you some of the short-term wins that lots of organizations are having right now, particularly when it comes to generative AI, when it comes to the development team. Because lots of development teams, as we know, aren't the biggest fans of documenting their code. And they're not the biggest fans of necessarily creating amazing test frameworks or test harnesses for those things. Generative AI is a great mechanism to actually identify what does this code do? What does this code block do? And how to document it thoroughly. So it can do that. And it can also do almost test-driven development and get to a point where you can have test harnesses and frameworks, which are really conducive to prove that what you've developed in code and what you've delivered is actually meeting the objectives of the requirements and the stories. So in the coding world, there's certainly a big area that I'm seeing a lot of uptake. From a long-term perspective, I'm seeing lots of custom models being created, trained on data from within the organization. So an example recently I came across was a very large organization that was in kind of the lawyer area and legal aspects. They said, you know what, we spend an inordinate amount of time identifying particular case law or particular statute that might be appropriate and applicable to the case in front of me. So why can't I use AI to be able to whittle that down to just a few short pieces where maybe that's my focus? So that way I can reduce the time it takes me to be able to execute on the law in front of me. At the same time, you have to balance that because you're like, well, as a lawyer, I'm getting paid for time. So perhaps that's not a good idea because right. I'm going to reduce my time. So you have to balance, what the return on investment is. And that's an important part that organizations are doing right now. They're not doing a great analysis of what does the true return on investment look like. Is it worth investing in these products? Because they're not necessarily cheap, especially when you do this service as a model and subscription-based model multiplied by the amount of users that need to take it. That can get costly, and we want to make sure we get good return on investment for those things.
Right. Valence, what are you seeing?
In the short term, it's actually, from a service perspective, being used a lot on the diagnostic and handling of services. So it use it for incident trending, understanding the symptoms and the elements that drive outages and issues. That's the primary use case you're seeing right now in service and service management, and it's built into the tooling. Where it's going and what's already starting to happen is the predictive element of it, which is now based on the factors I see, I can tell that those 4 things are going to fail in the next 2 months. So it initiates recovery. If it notices the same trends in desktops, what it'll do is it'll initiate the replacement of it. You don't even need people for it. So what it's doing is eliminating a lot of the active work that the service desk does. There's a concept in the industry not everyone likes to hear, which is services without service desk. All these mechanisms are going to get automated. It's going to detect it. It's going to initiate the work. And you're seeing that in certain places where it'll trigger that. It'll send the laptop or device that needs to be replaced right to the person. With the boxing to send their old version back, and it triggers it back to the desk as it exists to do the initiation or implementation of it once it's in play. So you're not going to see failures anymore. You're going to catch symptoms of things systematically and start to eliminate them from the system or work through the predictive capabilities. So that's the primary use case and the short to midterm use case we're seeing in the service side. It's not so much done on the strategy side yet because it's really not ready for that, but it is being used to eliminate and reduce problems in the system, work and automate flows so that you don't need individual intervention.
So with Exponential IT, with this new wave of AI, with changing technologies, what are some of the risks to service delivery that these technologies create?
Everything.
Yeah, thank you. And done and seen.
Carlene, would you like to expand on that answer?
Ultimately, services being the lifeblood of your organization, they're connecting directly with your customer, right? So there is all sorts of reputational risks. There's risks that are introduced through AI, through different compliance things, through deepfakes, through all sorts of things that are going to go through. That because you are now reaching out to the end customer, you have increased risk as a result of that. And so that will impact your growth, how you're delivering as an organization, and you have a lot more visibility as a result. And so because of that shift, it's introducing you to a new level.
Yeah. So Valence, what's the implication of that?
How much time do we have? There are a lot of implications to an organization. Reputation is a huge one. When reputation matters in terms of your success, ethical stance based on the services you provide, where AI may have an implication on your ethical decision making. And is it in line with those expectations of my organization and the services we provide? Even the aspect of using digital services and exposing them to the world and who consumes them is going to have geopolitical risks attached to it. A factor we don't talk enough about, but is driving almost every other risk factor in the world right now. And there's just the fact that we're so focused on generative AI, we stop thinking about all the other elements of AI that are being developed and services that are going to come out of that, which have risks that are unknowable. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know what it could do, and it's going to generate emergent risk. If we don't know, you can't prepare, and if you don't know can't prepare, you don't know impact. So there are unknowable risks that are going to come out of the use of AI in service provision that we can't even conceive of at the moment. So yeah, there's a very heavy risk factor on the unknowable, unknown aspect of risk, and we are starting to really see that as an emergent trend on risk and in services and things that consume AI.
Right.
On the generative AI side or the ML side, there's a new role that people talk about now, which is the machine model manager. And it's really around, let's identify all the machine learning that's going on, all the AI that's going on, and let's figure out, is there model drift? Is there bias in the model? Is there bias in the data? Is there hallucinations going on? Are we training it with poor quality data? All of those things, not many companies are actually thinking about right now. So what they're doing is they're on a journey towards a point where there's going to be a significant concern. And if we don't mitigate those risks now and put some kind of governance in place to make sure that we don't hit that point, people are going to start hitting it. I've seen it already. Companies have come to me and said, I've hit a point now where things have gone horribly wrong because this model is now coming up with hallucinations and people are believing it. And it's obviously wrong.
Absolutely. That hallucinations were one of the first emergent factors that came out of it. We didn't see it coming until it hit us. And the other aspect, there's so much sort of packed into what you said, but we don't govern it effectively. We don't have mechanisms. And even when we govern the model, and I know this is going a little bit far afield, the model is still contained. The risk is contained in an experimental space until I expose it to the real world where factors I can't consider start acting on it. I don't know what those factors are yet. And bias, whether there are 180 types of bias, we don't even understand bias at the level of being able to mitigate it effectively. And all those are going to be fed into the services we execute. it's going to have some results we can't anticipate, and those results can be massive and they can be damaging. And we'll talk about the rest of the risk.
We're not good at recognizing our own bias anyway, at the best of times.
Even how we are biased in looking at information once we see it. It can be unbiased and we're going to still throw our bias at it.
Right. So digital services, technology-enabled services, who owns that in the organization and who should own that in the organization? And balance.
So it's the business. It's always the business. What you're getting to is the elimination of the distinction between the two. IT is just a business capability applied to generate digital services for business need. So the business always owns it because they own the result and the outcome of doing it. The ownership of the outcome has to go with the ownership of the service being provided, or because their job is to make sure that the service provides what's needed, to eliminate the roadblocks to it, to govern it effectively, to make sure that it's adjusted for need. And the only person who knows what that need is and what those adjustments are going to be is going to be tied back to your stakeholders, coming to a business owner who's accountable to produce that. So IT is going to be what finance is. Finance doesn't own money for the business owns the money. They are the mechanism for managing it effectively.
I want to push back on that a little bit because I think it's fairly consistent with what we've heard year over year. Like, the business owns the service. We have the same product with product owners, service owners. But at the end of the day, isn't part of the problem that IT doesn't see itself as owning these outcomes? And maybe they should. Like, maybe if the majority of services that customers are engaging with are digitally enabled, and those are delivered through technology services provided by IT, why isn't IT accountable for those outcomes? They should be.
Because
and that's the shift that needs to happen, though. And that's really the change of going from trusted operator to true innovator, is taking that ownership and claiming it. And
I'm gonna push back on that. IT doesn't have the ability to claim ownership of a business requirement. The governance establishes ownership. IT cannot just jump in and say, I own that, and the business says, no, you don't, and it's over, because they own the end result. But
But isn't the idea of exponential IT to actually collaborate really effectively and say IT is going to be such a great partner with the business that they're going to collectively contribute to that service outcome?
I think that the roles are going to be entirely different. I think an exponential IT, the role of IT versus business goes away. We're all business.
Right.
exactly.
But the whole point is then it's not IT owning, it's the business owning it. We're the representative of the business in that particular case. But we have to eliminate the idea that IT owns it. No, we are part of the business. We own it because we're given that, but we have to own the elements that go with it. We have to own the outcome. We have to own the risk. And we don't own business risk. We got to be really careful. So unless we become the business entirely, we don't own business risk. We can't.
But why aren't we the business?
But that's because organizations don't want it. The whole point of changing the mind.
Isn't that what we want to change?
That's what we want to get to. So.
But exponential IT has been very heavily focused on the technologies and all elements, but the cultural changes that are required to change the mindset, some companies are not going to do it. Well, we have to be really, really clear about the fact that somebody has to want to relinquish that to the organization, and governance tends to follow mindset. So if you don't change mindset, and mindset is a very different thing to change, then all the other elements that it enables in terms of IT becoming that don't happen. So we have to figure out how to deal with the human element, the cultural element, the ingrained functional view of what our business is.
And there are certain business lines that are much easier to integrate with and collaborate with than others, right? So, if you're talking about general back office functions, yeah, sure, you can easily integrate with those and work together effectively. If it's a cutting edge mechanism where this service differentiates my organization and it's absolutely bleeding edge, like perhaps IT is going to have a more challenging time to integrate with them to deliver that service.
So I want to follow the thread that Valence went on just a little bit, which is that this is a cultural change. This is a mindset change. This is a people problem, probably more so than it is, a process or technology problem, right? So how do we, given that most organizations are not there, and there may be, even in some cases, what I'll call active resistance to this, how do we get there, right? How do we start taking those steps? And, is it, what are we seeing? Is this like a formal partnership? Is this like just going for it and asking for forgiveness? Like, how do we do this properly?
I've got a couple of points that I not normally use when I come to this mind shift and culture shift. The first one is identify people in the business that actually have IT acumen, because they are out there. Like, there's significant people that, just the other day, one of our sales folk at Infotech, I found out they've got a PhD in AI. Look, why aren't you contributing to our research? Let's get you in here. So, identifying people that are randomly in the business that have that capability, gravitate towards those, and they can become champions, and they can kind of talk the good talk and spread the word about how you want to do things more effectively. On the other side, identify people in IT that have really solid business acumen. They're more rare to find, actually. But if you can find those individuals and have them take that forefront and work together, that's a really good starting point to almost expedite that process.
I agree with what you've described, particularly for incrementally making that shift upwards. I think there's a critical conversation that you have to have, though, with whoever is the leader of your organization. Because you have to understand, what is the role of IT? If your services are predominantly going to be delivered through digital channels, that should change the role that you as a CIO have, and the accountability and the things that you're required to do. So I think in tandem with what you've described, there's a difficult conversation that has to happen about, how does IT provide value? How am I measured as a leader in the organization? I don't want to be measured on completing service desk tickets. I don't need to complete it on projects on time, on budget, but how do I contribute to the growth of the organization? What is the requirement that I have in order to pull the organization forward? And that's uncomfortable, both because it's a change in the role of the CIO, and you may not even want that job, so maybe don't have that conversation if you don't want that job. But if you do, that's the conversation you have to start with, because if you're seen as a person who's contributing to growth, to the bottom line, to the citizen community, then it's a very different role in the organization.
Does that mean that you have to effectively change the metrics of IT folk to directly
100%.
contribute to what the business is trying to do?
So this is exactly what we're seeing. And we see this with service organizations, where the measures of the CIO are increasingly based on profit and P&Ls, right? So for public-facing organizations. So are you driving growth? Are you driving revenue? And you actually have targets, you're compensated, even you're making bonuses based on what that looks like. And so you are measured, compensated, and take on the role that is much more integrated into the organization.
I can think of CIOs that will be very uncomfortable with that.
Well, there are going to be. There's a whole bunch of elements. One, we have to measure value, and that's a harder aspect, but it's something we should have been doing forever.
Yeah.
We've seen the rise of XLAs and experience management metrics because the things we were supposed to measure, which was value and experience and quality, weren't getting measured. It was the tactics and the activities. So IT has to stop thinking in tactics and activities and start thinking about what's valuable, what the work I do, and start communicating that, just to build up the acumen to talk about it and to build up enough reputation to be included in conversations that are not about tactics. In a lot of cases, we are the reason we're stuck in the bottle we're in. So we have to break out of that mentally. And organizations don't do that. We see that with metrics all the time. What are the top 10 metrics? Well, first of all, the best people don't show you what they're measuring. So we're working with the bottom average, and taking the average of that's going to be tactical. It's going to be activity-based. That is not a value conversation you want to be in. You don't show it in terms of what matters to the organization. Going back to the leadership aspect, one, we have to stop the proliferation of governing roles, leadership roles at the C-suite level. We keep spinning up a CDO, a CMO. It's great. Now we have 17 people with governance accountabilities that overlap. Bring it back to the core ones you need to govern an organization. And I'll quote Greg here because he has something about transforming into an exponential state. And he says a lot of what he's seen is transformation by retirement, which is some people are not going to move.
Right.
They're stuck and they're entrenched and they have so much power that they cannot be moved. So you have to understand what constraints you're dealing with. Sometimes the power dynamic is not going to allow you to move until the people in that dynamic choose to move on.
Right.
So when he says transformation, one retirement at a time, which I think is his full quote, sometimes that literally is the path you're going to have to take. I deal with a lot of organizations. Their governance doesn't change and account for things, not because they don't want to, but because the two people with power don't want to change, because the system of governing benefits them.
Right.
So if exponential IT and transformation doesn't benefit the people with power, they're not moving in that direction, and nothing on earth is going to shift them. So you have to make it worth their while. It has to be a benefit to the people with the power in that dynamic. It's all going to die on the power dynamic. And almost entirely, all governance lives and dies there first.
But it still is, it's incumbent upon people in IT to be knowledgeable enough about AI-enabled technology and modern technology that can support the business. And being able to bring it to our attention and say, here's the value stream model, here's the business capability model, this is where this AI-enabled technology can perfectly fit into that capability to make it 10 times more productive.
But even that aspect, which is, What's the value of doing this? I don't care about the capability model as a business person. What I care about is, what does this do for me? What's the outcome we get from it? Can we validate and guarantee that? And how does it help me? Because if I don't see it helping me, where are we going with this?
Right.
So what are some of the tactics in this kind of in-between zone, right? Because clearly the strategy is not just like wait for someone to retire and do nothing. Wait for your boss's boss to retire, and for the next 4 years you just kind of sit on your thumbs.
That's where I say it's about understanding constraint, which is what's immovable and what isn't.
Right.
I'm going to work in the domain of what I can change. I'm going to build up that acumen, build up the elements that allow me to maybe have some conversations. But I also have to know which things it's going to take way too much time and energy to change right now, and not keep slamming my head against that particular wall, because it's not going to change. That one's not going to change until we build the elements that allow it to change. So sometimes it's that incremental build of the things that make this safe for us to do or give them value, so that when I broach that conversation, we're not digging into this.
Right.
So sometimes it is going to be incremental. It's going to be building up the mechanisms, the conversations, the types of relationships we have to have before I can even broach that conversation, because this person right now is immovable, or understanding influence.
And that's exactly where I wanted to go, which is what are some of the tactics that we can take in kind of the short to medium term so that we're ready, right? So that we're poised when there are these broader kind of, organizational changes. It's not, okay, now we can start planning. It's, we've planned for this all along, and we're kind of ready for our moment. What are kind of the key pieces there that are going to help us out?
So I think there are a couple of muscles that people need to start building, right? I think in the blueprint, we talk about the 9 different service capabilities, and I think resoundingly people focus on service delivery capabilities most in IT. But there are 8 other ones. I'm not going to remember them all off the top of my head, but there's 8 other ones. And you have to start really building those muscles and starting to think about how that works. And with that, I would think about, one, how do you think about the service experiences that you want people to have, service orchestration, as well as service design, as 3 core capabilities that are consistently either pulled into other parts of the organization, and IT is not always involved in those steps. So starting to build those muscles within your organization, creating roles around that, trying to understand how they connect to the capabilities in your organization is a really important first step. Because if you're able to start showing wins in those areas, demonstrating value in those areas, then people will start to see you more in that role as well. And so those are the 3 capabilities that I generally recommend that people start strengthening first.
Absolutely. I would add service governance to it. How do I drive this to the goals of the organization and needs? Because you're right, people's focus for so long, when you say service management, it's going to be the service desk, it's going to, how do I handle incidents and this and that? Great. But all your focus is on what happens when a service fails. Not on whether the service is of value, not whether it meets the needs of the organization. I talk about, what do we do when something breaks? That's great. But that's when your value is lost. Every conversation is about loss of value. So how do we start moving to generating it, protecting it, all the things that are valuable? And I know the model has the 4 elements I talked about too, which is, am I creating it? Am I improving it? Am I sustaining it? Or am I protecting the value? So can we talk about what we do in terms of the value it generates? Not, again, incident management, great, we have to do it. We have to fix things that break. Maybe we build resilient systems that don't break so much in our design considerations. So we build resilience into the system of design, and that becomes a consideration, because what people don't want is a good repairman. They want things that don't break, right?
Well, one of the foundational things that I always go back to is data. Data is required to facilitate any of these services, and good quality data is required to facilitate doing the service correctly. So actually, identifying where in your data pipeline you need to be a bit more judicious in terms of how you modernize that is really important to get data of sufficient quality so that you can enable some of these new services. It also has the happy side effect of everything just works better, it's more effective, it's more accurate. That's always a good thing. And also, when we do this machine learning and AI, if it's being taught by content in your organization, at least it's good quality content. And the answers that you get are going to be much more reasonable. So I think investing in core capabilities like data, even cloud and DevOps and FinOps and those kind of concepts is really foundational. That's going to enable you in future. So first steps is some of those core concepts I would do.
And I'm embarrassed that I forgot data off because it's so important. That's a really good call out, because the other thing you can do with that, connecting back to what you said earlier, is look at some of the business capabilities that are maybe not performing really well, where they're leaking, and where you have great data, because that's a really great opportunity to leverage AI to make improvements. I was talking to a member the other day, and they're a large grocery chain, And they were looking at sort of their ordering practices. And they're like, oh, we have so much food waste.
Right.
And they have tons of data on it, but they weren't sure how to improve sort of that ordering service and how it all looks. And so they were able to actually, IT was able to look at sort of the data and sort of say, okay, this is when we should be doing ordering, this is when we should be turning down. And they were able to figure out when we should donate food and things like that. And so if you can find wins there too, they're saving money, helping their community, and also finding something that's really practical, right? So it's another great win that starts with good data and good architecture.
Yeah, and knowing who's accountable to understand what good quality data actually looks like, because often that's misplaced too. Yeah. But the other thing is just turning all the things we do, you mentioned DevOps and traditional styles and all the iterations between them, let's just turn those into tools in the toolbox of what we execute based on the complexity and need of work. I don't have to be an agile or a product or a service shop. I just need to be a shop that can leverage those mechanisms when I do something that requires it. I need to be fast where I need to be fast. I need to be structured where we need structure. The whole point is I don't have to be monolithically one thing. I build an organization that flexes based on the need, and as the need changes, we have the ability to move. It's problematic often. I'm a product organization. You may have products and services. You may have different elements that interact with each other. So how do I interact and align the models and aspects of work so that they shift based on my need, not simply I apply this to everything. Great, it doesn't work for everything.
So let's
no
talk.
framework works for everything.
You got me thinking about products and services and the notion of the definition of a service. Now, I was kind of chuckling to myself because, recently I had the product folks in here. You guys are the service folks. I saw in this blueprint, services are the lifeblood of the organization. In their blueprint, they say products are the lifeblood of the organization, like literally the exact same words. Are these two sides of the same coin? Like what's really the distinction here? How do you define a product versus a service? Carlene, you're laughing. Where does your head go?
Well, because there are commonalities between the two of them. Both of them are creating an experience for the customers that delivers some sort of value. I think they grew up from different fields. One tends to have grown up from more of that service management. One tends to have grown up through agile practices. But where they've actually differed and changed, they both are delivering value. They're both using technology. They both create experiences. But a service for me goes across all of the products, the services, the end customers to create a truly integrated experience. And for me, it's that one level higher that's actually more likely to be more closely embedded into your business because it's the true value that you're giving directly to your customers. And so you can have both frameworks happening at the same time. Like you can have products and services in an organization. You still need a service orchestrator who's going to go across and stitch those products up for your end customer so that they're valuable, right? I don't want to go to 4 different food trucks to get my lunch. I want to be able to say, this is what I want, and everything comes to me, right? And the service is what stitches those together.
Yeah, and I sort of along those veins, we have products and services as an organization. We have a workshop product that has a whole component around it and a value proposition. How do we deliver them as services? The experience of running it is the value proposition of it, having it and having that product and having the value prop tied into it. But the experience is I facilitate, I execute. When I get a dinner, it's a service experience. Now there are all types of things that they do, products and elements they have. I have a menu, things you can order. I have chefs, I have cleaning, I have music and ambiance, but the service encompasses and encapsulates all of that. Services existed forever. As soon as someone said, I need you to help me build that, and I build it, and you pay me, there's a service provided. Services existed forever. It's still the monolith in terms of where money goes. If you look at OECD and other things, and when you look at the service space, it's monstrous. I don't know why people think it's going away. It's never going away. But there's another aspect, which is to some extent where product is going and service is gone, they become flip sides of a coin that's no longer currency. Let's just figure out how we generate value and the mechanisms by which we do it, and then I don't care what we call it anymore. Sometimes that's the direction we probably should be going in. Is it a product service? Who cares? We generate value through these mechanisms. Let's focus on the fact that we generate value. So eventually these things should start fading into the background.
I like to keep these things really, because we keep talking about product and services and almost changing our semantics as we're talking about it. It's very difficult not to. I like to keep it really simple and just say, you have a product which is not in its own right deliverable to a client on its own. You have to have some kind of service to deliver that product. So in my mind, it's a product, a global product, And then there's multiple services and ways of delivering that product. And you might have service orchestration in multiple services, maybe, but you have to have some kind of service mechanism to do that. But a product on its own, yes, you can have product orientation, you can have a product mindset, sure, you can think about the product and have product management, all good there. But the product on its own doesn't do anything unless you have a service wrapping that, unless you have a service delivering that thing.
Thank you everyone for joining me today. I think this has been a great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Our blueprint here, our methodology that gets people from here to there, what does that look like? What are kind of the core, steps or phases within the methodology?
Yeah, so this whole thing is super simple. You can get to Exponential IT Service Planning in just 3 quick steps. We're going to
Just overnight, right?
Overnight, we're going to get there. It's going to be perfect, smooth journey, no problems. But it is 3 steps,
Yes.
though it may be a bit more complicated than that. So step 1 that we focus on is, and it's fairly standard when it comes from a strategy perspective, but what you'll find in each step is where the uniqueness is.
Right.
So we start with guiding principles. I'll go into these in a little bit more detail. Start with guiding principles, defining what value means for you, defining what service means for you. So making sure you have a shared understanding of who are your customers, what is a service, what are we trying to achieve, and how would we measure success around that? It sounds really obvious and simple because you always should start a strategy there, right? But in this case, it requires you to think differently about who those customers are, what those values are, and how IT can play a different role in the organization. So we start by there. Have a really clean idea of where you're going, what you want to do, and that's sort of step 1. In step 2, we're going to go through those different milestones. So I mentioned there are 9 different capabilities, and for each of them, we have defined what level 1 through level 5 looks like, and what are the actionable things that you can do across that. And so we go through and we look at each of these different levels. And one of my favorite things about this journey is that we're not just saying go direct to tech. We are looking at some of the core processes and capabilities as you go through that. But we have included a really detailed use case library of the use cases that exist today, right? Or the things that are emerging. Because obviously these are going to change repeatedly over the next couple of years. But we really looked at, for those 9 different capability areas, what are the AI use cases that are near term? And what are the things to look out for that may be helping you down the road that may not be quite ready yet, but are things that you may want to prepare your data for, prepare your processes for, prepare your people for, in terms of how that may evolve. And so we looked at what those are. We've given you, a nice way of evaluating whether it's appropriate for your organization. And so we take those different pieces of input, where your processes are, your current state, your target state, and really help you to identify, okay, what are you going to do next? And so we take that really pragmatically into stage 3, which is what we'll actually look at what the delta is between your current and target and come up with a detailed roadmap with you on how are you going to get there? And most importantly, how are you going to sell it? Because this isn't something that, is going to happen for free. You're going to have to invest in different parts of your organization, right? And so as we build out that roadmap and strategy, we're thinking about what are the core initiatives, who's going to be involved, and how do you position the value of that? And so at the end of that, what you have is a really clear vision of where you want to go, but also you'll have a really streamlined strategy that you can present, use to your teams, use at your board of directors, or whatever it may look like.
Just on that note, Carleen, you talked a little bit about a roadmap about selling this. What are kind of the deliverables? What are the key, artifacts you walk away from if you walk through this methodology?
Yeah, so the first one is that core strategy, right? So that strategy is made up of what your guiding principles are, your overall goals, and we've actually created a values cascade for this because value is the heart of what the services are looking at. So we created our values cascade, the roadmap to get there, and the detailed initiatives overview. So a nice, clean, straightforward strategy that'll get you from here. And it's broken into 3 waves. So what are you going to do in the next year and the 2 years after that, right? We always say here, let your vision be long, but your strategy be short. So plan for where you want to go. And then we've broken that into chunks. And then to get there, we have an overall workbook that helps you to evaluate your opportunities, evaluate your current and target state, to really refine and pick the right initiatives for your organization, not just because, Jeff's doing it over here, but what makes sense for your organization. So we give you an evaluation framework and a prioritization framework on that too.
You mentioned this isn't going to be done overnight. How long does it take to kind of get started on this journey? And how are we seeing that unfolding for people from a length of time perspective? Looking at this as a project.
Yeah, so I would think about service design and expansion as a program. So it's something you're going to want to invest in over time. But when we look at the activities to create that strategy, we can accelerate that with you. So we do have a workshop that we do along this. That's a 4-day workshop. And we basically get to that strategy in the 4 days. You may tweak, it's a busy 4 days. You may tweak that over time, of course. But what that looks at is creating that overall initial strategy moving forward. And then from there, we can work with you on implementing each of those initiatives as you go through.
Carlene, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been really insightful.
You're welcome, Jeff.
And for those interested in learning more about elevating your service capabilities, check out the full blueprint at infotech.com.